Hi everyone! So today I want to talk about roasting squash and other vegetables in the oven. Squash you see everywhere in the grocery store in the fall and moving into winter around holiday time, but they can be sort of daunting if you don't know how to prepare them. Even how do you cut them up? They're really, really hard, and some of them are enormous. So this is a buttercup squash. I actually grew these in my garden. I've never grown squash before, and planted the seeds early or in the summer, and they somehow started growing really, really late, and I just harvested them because it's going to freeze and I don't want the texture of the flesh to get strange. So I'm going to cut them up and cook them with you today. So these squash are small enough, you can just use a regular knife in your kitchen. There are some squash that are huge, like the blue Hubbard squash, and Rachna from Food Stand said that she has some friends who put the blue Hubbard squash in a bag and toss it out the window, and the force of gravity, the squash hitting the ground, actually causes it to break into pieces, and then you can process it if you can't get your knife in there. I have never done that, but I thought that was a funny tip. So with these, you just want to cut right next to the stem. Make sure you have a solid working surface. This is a solid wood cutting board, and I'm going to put the tip of my knife in right next to the stem because the stem can be hard to go through. So I'm just putting my knife in, and you do have to put some body weight in it. Put your other hand, make sure that you don't have your fingers in line with your knife. So you want to make sure that you're not going to cut any fingers off. But you just cut all the way around. And yeah, you have to use some muscle, but it's not that hard. And just make sure to watch your fingers through the whole time. So here's the squash. I'm so excited. It actually looks the right color and everything like that. Then you're going to want to scoop out the seeds. Some squash have seeds that are really great to roast. You can save them and roast them later. They're great just tossed with a little bit of olive oil and salt and pepper. You can roast them in the oven at about 375 degrees. Here I'm throwing squash seeds everywhere. But these ones we're just going to set aside. You can just scoop them out for now. And I should mention too, you want to be preheating your oven. So you're going to set it to 375 degrees. And I like 375 because it allows the squash to cook through before it browns too much. If you set it too high, the squash will start to burn on the edges before it actually cooks through. And squash is such a solid, hearty thing that you want to make sure that the inside of the flesh really gets cooked. So once you've scooped out all the seeds, I'm going to put the squash face down on the cutting board. I'm going to grab a peeler, and I'm going to peel the squash. I like to do it when it's in a half because then I can use the cutting board. It's a solid thing just to start. Then I'll cut it in quarters and finish. But I'm just going to peel it here. And you can see once you start peeling that the color underneath is more of this yellow orangey color, and you want to peel it off, all of the skin off, so that you can really see, you don't want a green tinge, you can really see the orange flesh underneath. So here you can see in the middle we're starting to get a little bit more of that nice orange color, and you want that all over the whole squash. So once I've peeled off a good chunk of the skin here, I'm going to cut it smaller so it's easier to handle. Again, I'm going to cut next to the stem. The stem can be really tough to cut through. And then I'm going to continue peeling. So this has the bottom of the squash here that is also tough to cut through. So I'm going to cut the bottom of that off. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm going to cut off the stem. You can just cut right next to it on an angle to get rid of this big stem. And then I'm going to continue peeling. So squash can be great just served alongside chicken and rice or really anything when it's roasted in the oven. It can be good next to some fish, really anything. But I also like to toss it with pasta. So one of my favorite dishes is to roast vegetables. You can do squash, you can do broccoli, onions, turnips, parsnips, really any vegetable in the oven. I roast them, toss them just with a little bit of salt and pepper and olive oil. And then I toss the vegetables after they're roasted with just some cooked brown rice pasta. Here I have pinchiata pasta. It's an organic brown rice pasta available in a lot of grocery stores, but you can use any pasta you like. Here's just some jarred tomato sauce. This is Rao's homemade tomato sauce. It doesn't have any added sugar or any preservatives, anything like that. It's a great choice at the supermarket. Any sauce is great, just make sure it doesn't have any added sugar in it. So you toss the sauce, the pasta, the roasted vegetables, topped with a little bit of Parmesan or Pecorino cheese and some chopped herbs. I like parsley, and it's a really easy meal to make. I also like to serve these roasted vegetables with just brown rice and beans, which make a complete protein and are a great way to add some more bulk to the meal. So these are some cannellini beans here. This is some organic brown basmati and wild rice. So I finished peeling half of my squash. I cut the half in half. The other half I've left with the skin on. Now you can do squash, you can cut it into cubes and toss the cubes with olive oil, sea salt, and black pepper, or you can roast it in larger chunks with the skin on. And it can be really nice to serve a piece of the squash with the skin on a plate. It's really beautiful presentation, and it cooks through as well. Then you scoop the flesh out as you're eating it, this flesh out of the skin. So I'm actually going to cook half this way and half in cubes. So to prepare the skin on half, I'm just going to cut it into wedges. Again, make sure that you avoid your fingers. You don't want to cut your fingers. And we're just going to cut it into large wedges and put those on my baking tray. For the chunks, you just want to cut, you can do the cubes as really as large or small as you like. Cut them into strips. So here I've made these pieces here. And then you cut the strips into cubes. And note that when I'm cutting these, I'm keeping my fingers away from my knife. At this point, the squash is pretty easy to handle, to be honest. Once you have the skin off and it's in these smaller bits, it's not as daunting or hard to handle as when you have the skin on and it's one big squash that you're trying to cut. So I've got my squash all cut up into cubes here. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to all be exactly the same. You want them to be roughly the same size just because they will cook more evenly that way. Some will be way overcooked while others are still raw, but they don't have to be perfect at all. So now I'm just going to toss the wedges and the cubes with olive oil. This doesn't have to be perfect either. Just throw some oil down there. Toss them so they're nicely coated. The oil is going to help them brown evenly. You get some nice caramelized pieces that are really, really delicious. Just rub the wedges all over with the olive oil as well. And again, we're doing squash because I wanted to show you how it's much easier to cut squash, particularly buttercup, butternut, acorn squash. They're a reasonable size, but it's much easier to handle them than one might think. But you can do it with broccoli, you can do it with sweet potato. I don't peel the sweet potato, I just cut off the knobby ends and cut them into matchsticks or cut them into chunks. Do the same thing with that. You can do it with pieces of onion as well. Onion roasted in the oven on a baking sheet is really, really delicious too. So then we're going to add some black pepper. Some sea salt as well. I just have sea salt flakes in a grinder here. Again, we'll give those a little toss. Spread the cubes out nicely. Get salt and pepper on the wedges as well. We're going to put it in the oven and we'll check back in a little bit. So the squash has been cooking for about 30 minutes. We're going to pull it out of the oven, and toss it and see how it's doing. So as you can see, it's starting to get some color. We're just going to flip the wedges over. The bottom has had contact obviously with the baking sheet and is starting to brown. You want the top to do the same, so flip those over. And we're just going to give the cubes a toss. Again, so that they cook evenly. Spread those back out. We'll put those back in the oven. All right, the squash are done. They've been cooking for 50 minutes. Pull them out here. The cube squash are a little bit crisp on the outside, nice and tender on the inside. The slices are starting to show some color. You can see here a little bit of color on both sides. And if I'm doing either, I like to drizzle a little bit of olive oil, maybe some black pepper as well. And there you have it. If you have any questions, direct message me at AnnFood on the Food Stand app. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.